Tonight, we'll have the chairperson of the initiative and an economist, a former presidential candidate, former minister in Nigeria, and a former VP at the World Bank, Dr. Oby Ezekwesili. She joins us from our Abuja studio. Congratulations, Dr. Ezekwesili, on the successful launch of the Fixed Politics initiative, and you're out in today. Well, this initiative, I understand, is the brainchild of your fellowship awarded by the Richard von Versker Fellowship at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin from September 2019 up until early 2020. Can you give us a clue as to the research findings that you got out of that fellowship?
Yes, thank you very much, Seun. My research focused on the nexus, in other words, the relationship between politics and economic performance of countries. I was interested in probing that, in just studying that, because you know, I had stepped down from running for office, and what I had seen of politics in that very short period that I was in it just opened my eyes to the fact that in fighting the issues of governance, we were waiting for too late in the day, that it's actually politics that, you know, drives what ultimately becomes governance. And so I wanted to see how politics correlates with economic performance of countries. And so I had to go and have that reflection through the award of the fellowship in Berlin. And a key finding is that any society ignores its politics at its own peril. Any individual, any community, any family, any business ignores politics at their own peril. Politics is extremely correlated with whether society functions or does not function. And second, that politics is what happens in order for you to qualify to be called a democracy. And that the political process is organized in a way that is systemic. And so in my analysis, I came up with something called the triangular pillars of democracy, showing that there are three critical things that define every democracy. You have the electorate, then you have the political class or the politicians, and then you have the regulatory environment in which these two interact in a form of a pyramid. And so the political class and the citizens as the electorate interact. In their interaction, there is an apex body that is constitution, legislation, institutions like the ombudsman for election, the umpire for election, INEC, or the judiciary, and increasingly, and in our own case, establishments of the security and such other institutions. Now, in this triangular relationship, there is a continuous intersection and interconnectivity. And this then determines whether you would get the right quality of outcomes in any society. In societies where the electorate are empowered and engaged and are able to make rational choices and decisions about political process and political issues, the political outcomes are good, and therefore you get to good governance. It's even so when you now have the value-based politicians in the political class. In the political class where you've got ethical politicians who are competent, who have character and have capacity, what you get is even higher level of outcomes. And then it is more so when you have an environment, a political context, or the regulatory context that enables independence of arbitration of the interaction between these two groups that are the base angle of the triangle. So it just sort of opened one's eyes to the fact that analytically, most of African countries are stuck in low equilibrium, because the kind of politics that we play is one where you don't see the influence of the electorate, and one where you see that the political class or the politicians have appropriated the entire space of politics to the utter neglect of the demand side of politics. And then where the regulatory context is so weakened and undermined that it does not even act independently. So no wonder we have poor governance. So if you're going to ever get good governance, you must correct your politics and its kind of outcomes.
Indeed, I must say that that event of today was well attended. The speakers also spoke very well, and they touched on a lot of issues relating to the problems of Nigeria, also proffering solutions. But let me quickly ask you, there being some suggestions, especially from the speaker, like the former president of Mexico, where he said politics of a country is at the center of the people's life and the need to be part of it. There's a need for inclusion. Generally, what resonates with you on some of these issues raised from the speakers today?
So I was and I was very pleased, to hear these speakers really put a voice to what the research was, and the findings were really saying. So it was basically like I went off, did this research, and now I hear people speaking, and it just is very typical of the findings, because I didn't just, sort of think some idea through to my mind. I'm very analytical about issues. So, and politics was just this elephant that I needed to understand better after what I had seen of the Nigerian political terrain. We thought that things were bad, but goodness, you need to understand Nigeria's politics and the way it functions in order for you to realize why we must pay attention to politics. And to hear somebody like the former president of Mexico, clearly stated that any individual in society who is not paying attention to politics is actually undermining himself or herself. And then to know that many of the speakers came back to exactly what the research showed, that the only group in that pyramid that immediately would have an incentive to want to change a system that is broken is the electorate. The electorate, meaning the citizens. So the office of the citizen, which is the emphasis of the research in terms of the pathway out of the paralysis that leads to poor governance, is at the center of every conversation today. So we must pay attention, therefore, to how we improve the engagement as well as the empowered choices of the electorate. And Seun, when you remember that the electorate in most of Africa, it's made up of two key segments: the low-income class voters and the middle-class voters. There are different issues that concern those two segments. In the case of the low-income class voters, these are voters whose productivity is so low that their vote is not expensive. That's why you have incidents of purchase and sale of vote, right? Because their productivity is so low. Election day is just another day in their lives. And so any amount of money that improves their productivity earning in cash or non-monetary form is definitely an incentive that they would go for. In the case of the middle-class voters, they simply have opted out of the system. They get their voter's card, not because they are planning to vote, but peradventure, they need to show that voter's card in order to board their flight abroad. Then they would have a voter's card to show. So that means that you have a serious deficit of electorate influence, rather, that you must design to change. And that's what fixed politics is definitely determined to do. One of the ways to change it is that we must have community organizers who are basically waking up the entirety of the Nigerian electorate to the rational choices that they would need to make. We would also blend the kind of innovations that we do with the electorate at the different segments that they represent.
I mean, watching and listening to the speakers today brought out some very important issues, and the understanding of the system also today gave one an insight into some of the problems. There is issues of value, there is issues of the deficiency in our laws, there is issues of the triangle of the system that makes Nigeria work and why it's not working, the old and the traditional political practice and why we need to change them. They also spoke about youth participation. But for the average Nigerian voter or average Nigerian that is watching us now, perhaps on his or her mobile phone in one rural community, rather in Warri or in Oko, in Kwara State or in Ijebu-Ode, and watching us right now, what would you say is that one major thing that came out to you today as an urgent problem that needs to be fixed?
I think it's political literacy. You know, so low productivity is one thing. You know, they just need money to survive for a day. So if it is offered them, they wouldn't care what political choices they are making. So we have to fix that. In fixing that, you have to get many more people who are doing interventions to improve productivity of the low-income class outside of the electoral cycle. You need to design their programs of interventions in a way that achieves scale. You need many more people to have barriers to their productivity removed so they can earn more and have more dignity in what choices they are making when it comes to elections and politics. But you need to design in a way that you blend it to political literacy. We need to do urgent and sustained, very methodical voters enlightenment. We need to get to the place where the political consciousness of our poor, they can connect poverty, they can connect the fact that children cannot go to good schools, can't get good health. They can connect it to the fact that there is budget that actually gets passed to do those kinds of things, but they don't get done. And that 4 years later, somebody is up at the field asking them to vote for them. We need to connect their daily lives to the message that politics is what is keeping them stuck to the bottom. And that if there's anyone who can get themselves out of that state of being stuck, they are the ones. They are more powerful than they can even imagine. We need to let our poor know that. They need to understand that poverty is not, it doesn't take away, it mustn't take away dignity. That the dignity they have is that their office is more important than the office of the president. The office of the president is the highest political office in the land, but the office of the citizen, especially a citizen with the power to vote, to determine who the leaders of our public space will be, is more powerful than that of the president, because they give legitimacy to that office of the president. Without that poor man in Ikare or in Enugu or in Karanamoda or anywhere else in this country, the president's office will not happen. So they are powerful.
All right. So we'll take a break, first break on the program. But when we come, Dr. Ezekwesili, we'll be asking you the practical step and strategies that you have laid out, the bigger picture of the Fixed Politics Initiative. A lot of Nigerians might be looking forward to what, in the end, this will amount to them and for them in the nearest future. Don't go anywhere, everyone. We'll be right back. A concluding moment with Dr. Ezekwesili. We'll be right back. Thank you so much, everyone, and welcome back to the program. Let's get back to the conversation with Dr. Oby Ezekwesili, the chairperson of the Fixed Politics Initiative, an initiative that was launched earlier today in Nigeria. And the plan is to fix Nigeria's politics. So I know you ran for office in 2019 at the presidential election. You pulled out at some point. And so you have insight into some of these issues. So a lot of people will want to know the bigger picture, because at the end of the day, politics is not in itself an end, it's a means to an end. So at the end of the day, after all said and done, a lot of people will want to understand and know what is the end game, what is the bigger picture.
So the bigger picture is that we must have a political system that functions on this tripod, where we have, the electorate that acts with a lot of influence. And their influence is well understood by a political class that is trained in the art of ethical politics, that also have been trained in the art of statecraft, so that, they understand economy, they understand economics and other social and sectoral policies, and what it takes for a society to grow in every aspect of life, and they also understand governance. That's why, for us, we're going to do the empowering the electorate kinds of activities, but we're also going to run an unconventional school of politics, policy, and governance. It is going to be a school that will produce a really strong a really strong set of public leaders that are driven by values, that are competent in policy, that also can build governance systems. And then we're going to work with the larger public to drive a campaign for the kinds of constitutional change, the political and electoral reform changes that we need in order to have independent arbitration of our political space. So by the time you look at the different initiatives that we're doing along this tripod of the triangular pillars of democracy, we will begin to look like other societies where politics actually upgraded. And when politics upgraded, the quality of governance upgraded, and then the improvement in the lives of citizens began to happen. Because politics is a process toward serving the need of society. In my research, what we saw is that the reason you cannot tell any difference between one political party from the other in Nigeria or in a number of other African countries is that over time, the political class has taken over the political space with a dominant political culture that subordinates the collective good of society to the personal and narrow interests of the politicians. You have to address that. That's why our own program is a program that's systematic and systemic. So it's connected. You can't do one. Part of what we failed in the past to do was to look at this from the holistic kind of approach that the research shows that we must follow. And that's definitely for the long haul. Some people kind of think, oh, do this thing because 2023. No, come on, guys. 2023 is not our end game. Our end game is that we must fix our politics so that we become like nations that were at the same level of development as ourselves, but have now left us so badly behind. Today, Singapore is at $65,000 income per capita. Nigeria is at less than $3,000 income per capita. And yet we set out on the development agenda exactly at the same time in the 60s, having been both colonized by Great Britain at that time.
Dr. Ezekwesili, what message are you sending out to the political class?
Well, the message is simple. We're saying that the kind of monopoly of the political space by a dominant culture, it is that culture that we call the monopoly product. The governance that has been offered by our political class is of a monopolistic nature. There is no competition to it. What we now want to do is that whether it is at the local level or it's at the state level, or it's at the national level, whether it is for legislative office or for executive office in our democracy. We're going to have a massive scale of people who have now been trained to say we represent a different mindset of politics as service. That's what the unconventional school of politics, policy, and governance will do. Every 6 months, we're going to train we would train 500 such people. Imagine what would happen in 10 years' time. We would have a different class of people who are in politics in our country, talking differently and doing especially differently.
There are a few problems that have been identified along the way, aside the issue of educating the masses, the electorate. One of it is the issue of the deficiency in our electoral law. Others include the issues of the consequence of electoral offenses. And another is citizens' participation. How many of our citizens genuinely go out to participate in politics, perhaps in voting process? So talk us through briefly, the strategy in achieving this end game that you have set out.
Citizens' participation, look at it. The turnout for presidential election in 2019 was somewhere around 35%. Now, at the dawn of our democracy in 1999, we were almost hitting 60%. I think it must have been 57%. Over the course of 8 elections or thereabout after, the interest of the citizens waned. And that's because they did not see the value in staying engaged in the process. We're going to have programs that address that. By the way, this whole thing is based on partnership. We are not interested in being some tiny group that's doing something about this. We're basically going to make sure that we connect the dots and that you can build a massive army of people who are organizing in their communities to raise voter participation. We already have incredible number of people saying, I want to be part of the community organizers to make sure that my community understand the power that they have in elections. On the matter of on the other questions that you asked, if you looked at the political system and the way that it is configured, you would see that some of our laws require reform. For example, when you look at what the Uwais committee did in harmonizing some of the important reforms that we need to the electoral legislation, you can tell that the independence of INEC is one that we still must fight for. We cannot afford to have a situation where a person who was recently just on the on social media being a complete disaster to the government by not engaging with citizens, but rather spending time insulting citizens who have a criticism or one or the other to make about the way governance goes is in INEC as a commissioner. That is so partisan. That's so blatant. It's such gross behavior to find. And that's because the electoral law permits the president to act in that kind of a way. So there are many aspects of electoral law that would need changing. Look at political parties. Political parties, in my research, we found that in many of the countries, they end up becoming vehicles of transaction. They simply don't represent an ideology. They do not represent a philosophy. They do not even shape the values of society. And this has to change. So all of those things are under the regulatory environment that I spoke about. And the citizens are going to rise up and say, we want a society where our votes count. That, for example, is what we saw in Georgia. A woman got up in Georgia and she was cheated when she ran for governor. And she decided they did not make votes count in this state, or Georgia in America. I'm going to make sure that votes count. And she went to work on it. We must be persistent. We cannot afford to be people who are always thinking short term. I want it to be that fixed politics over the next 20 years would so change and transform our political processes, our outcomes in this society, that we would then see that children that are born into Nigeria can be global peers of any other of their groups born elsewhere, simply because we have a society that works, a society that delivers, regardless of who you are. We need to build an inclusive society. We need to not, diss our poor. It's almost like the poor are invisible to us. It shouldn't be so. The poor are so disempowered to the point where they have learned the disempowerment themselves. They feel like they can't change anything. It's not true. The poor, the day the rage of the poor gets out in this country, that's when the political class will understand. And I think we saw a little bit of it with the young people who said, enough is enough. You killed enough of young people for nothing, without any form of consequence. And they went to stand against it. That we risk having a situation where the citizens of this country, rather than following a process of conversation with the political class to solve the problems of society, now begin to engage in a violent way of doing it. That should not be the case. We should be able to have a decent society that holds healthy debates on the challenges we have and the opportunities we must translate.
All right. Dr. Ezekwesili, to wrap up this segment of the conversation, in 30 seconds, I will do that. It does look like what you're describing to us tonight is a game changer. How soon should Nigerians be expecting this? Because it looks so interesting to hear. And how far-reaching would this be in 30 seconds, if you can give us your final thoughts?
It would be extremely far-reaching. We're determined, we're determined to engage in sustained actions. We have incredible Nigerians who have come together to do this. And it's not just going to be, it's not just about being far-reaching. It is not a sprint for us. It is a marathon. And we're determined to carry on this journey. The school is going to open up in January. Our first set of students will be in January, and we're going to get the best of students. The kind of strong appetite we already have for the school is amazing. About every 6 months, we will take people with character, competence, and capacity, and then give them this module of training of 34 courses in politics, in policy, and in governance. Prepare them to be leaders that would take charge of the public space. And then all our programs that would empower the electorate would start almost immediately. Our community organizers program is going to be launched very soon. So we're not talking of, we're preparing. We're ready. And we're just asking everyone who cares about a decent society to simply join us and fix politics.
Dr. Oby Ezekwesili, former VP at the World Bank and former minister here in Nigeria, chairperson of the Fix Politics Initiative. Thank you indeed for talking to us tonight and coming on the show.
Thank you.